In our last section, we discussed the partition of Poland. It happens at the end of the 18th century. Poland is divided between Austria, Prussia, and Russia. And along with that settlement, under Catherine the Great in 1791, the Jews of that region, who were the largest population of Jews in the world, were constrained by something called the Pale of Settlement, which is kind of like a loose border in which they were required to work in this region, and they had certain limited rights in this area, and they could not, they tried to keep them out of Moscow and such, because as the Russians take over that section, there's a large amount of Russian anti-Semitism, and the Jews are seen as a threat. So the Jews had been invited to this region in the 13th century by the Polish kings, who, it was a thriving population, found itself under a harsh regime, really, and the Jews are going to suffer during this time period, and unfortunately, as we know, the Jews will have a much larger tragedy later in the 20th century under the Holocaust, and all the things that are going to happen. We'll discuss that again. So the Jews are confined. The Poles are submerged into the Russian Empire, and they do their best. The Russians do their best to keep the Poles from rising, and there's going to be numerous Polish rebellions under especially the Russian sections. The Poles do better under Austria in many ways. The Austrians gave them a lot more autonomy, and they're going to be in a region called Galicia, primarily in the Austrian Empire, and that's in the northeastern section of the old Austro-Hungarian Empire. And when we read the book The Sorrowful Eyes of Hannah Karadzic, it deals with that region and the Jewish population. New developments that happened in the 19th century is a rise of nationalism in Central and Eastern Europe. There's what they call the springtime of nations, or the reawakening of nations. They're influenced heavily by a philosopher named Johann Gottfried Herder, Herder, who was a German philosopher who opposed the universalism of the Enlightenment, and universalism meaning that man is common with man, really, that there's this universal rights of man, and that men should be treated as equals. Well, under Herder's theory was that the planet was made up of groups of people he called nations, and he is going to be the first who's going to really link this to the idea of language. And he saw this as language as an expression of this national identity, and he had favorable views of the Slavs. They had a bright future when he looked towards the east, being a German, and this is going to inspire many people in the region to look to their culture and try to find, their own folk history, and start looking at peasant costumes, and the peasants become a focus of this, the true source of the nation, which they never were before, because the peasants, in many ways, especially in the mid-19th century, many of them are still serfs in various regions of Central and Eastern Europe, and pretty much equated with slaves in a lot of ways. So this is a new thing, that suddenly the peasants are going to have some kind of special spirit. And this movement's going to be led by the nobles, the noble elites, the educated noble elites, and they're going to see the peasants as a source of inspiration. And there's going to be these movements to go to the peasants all over Eastern and Central Europe, including in Russia itself, in the mid-century. And in 1848, rebellions are going to, and revolutions will appear throughout the region, and again, it's going to be this push towards national recognition. But when you push for national recognition, you also have a tendency to find people in your group who you don't feel meets those criteria. So as you are identifying your own nation, you're also dismissing others as being not part of that nation. So the Jews, for example, in some areas are going to be seen as included in this category. As in Hungary for a long time, the Hungarian Jews will be assimilated and considered Hungarians. That's going to change right before World War II. But in other regions, Jews or the Roma people or whoever was your neighbor who happened not to speak your language might suddenly be under suspicion. And so the 19th century is a critical time for this region, for the peoples to start to identify themselves as a group. And Herder's philosophy is going to be very important to that conception of what the group is and how the group is constituted. Much of this region is under, empires. The Polish people, of what we consider Poland today, or that region, is like I said, split between 3 different areas. The Lithuanians are under the Russian Empire during the 19th century. What will later be Belarus or Belarusians, they're under the Russian Empire, and they're going to be part of the Russian Empire and the Soviet Union. And they don't actually break away until 1991, so they're not like a political idea as a unit or even a nationality for very late, and their awakening happens quite late as well. Ukraine is, again, it's a part of various empires. Some of the region was under Austro-Hungarian control, some of it under the Russian Empire. Bringing us up to the 20th century, at the turn of the 20th century, there becomes a critical movement as to how the Western nations will deal with the East, and how places or nations like Russia or the Russian Empire deal with the East. When we talk about the East during this time period, they're looking to the Southeast, they're looking to the Balkans. The Ottoman Empire is crumbling, and everyone sees this as an opportunity to expand, to colonize within their own continent in many ways. And when World War I breaks out, a lot of it is really directly related to this. Who's going to have control of the Southeast? And from your other classes, you probably know the number of events that lead to the First World War. We won't discuss them here, but be it as it may, all the peoples of Central and Eastern Europe participate in this war. So under the Russian Empire, those who are under the Russian Empire, send troops towards the southeast, towards the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and against Germany. And so Poles and Lithuanians and Estonians and Ukrainians and Belarusians, they're all part of the Russian Empire. So they're fighting on that side if they're part of the Russian Empire. If they're part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, so the Poles under Galicia, for example, might be fighting fellow Poles on the other side of the border in the Russian area. Austro-Hungary and Germany are allies during this war, so the multinational Austro-Hungarian army fights alongside with Germany, and sometimes against their own people, as I just mentioned. When World War I ends, this area is devastated in many ways. Unlike Western Europe, most of the devastation is built upon trenches in France and such. The trench warfare is not the war of the East. What we have instead is the dismantling of the empires. The Austro-Hungarian Empire falls, the German Empire falls, and the Russian Empire falls. And that leaves a wake of destruction and chaos that becomes critical to what happens next in the century, and how World War II will emerge as well. And we'll talk about that in the next section.